Um, yeah, it's fun. I love it. I got a pharmacy student from New York State who is big into coffee. I don't fucking drink coffee, so I had to ask the parents, and they told me about the artisanal stuff. So I got her a bunch of that, and then I sent her panty and stocking because
I know a guy who's in coffee crafting. It's his employment.
coffee crafting.
I mean, yeah, he does like the whole like they get their beans and they do like specific brews and whatnot. And
Do you flavor the beans? Is that a thing? Do they flavor them?
like I have no idea. I assume
they
you have to talk to him, but he's like really into it. So
they put a little vanilla bean in the roots of the cocoa tree, and when it grows, they have cocoa flavor or vanilla flavored cocoa beans.
yeah, they let it steep in 100-year-old wine barrels to give it that little extra richness.
I bet they do. I bet they do. Um, so this is an intro. Here we go. This is one of our first one-on-ones. Today we're talking with Seifuu, one of the moderators from Our True Anime and general all-around cool guy.
Ooh.
Seifu, I wanted to bring you on to have you talk first a little bit about your experiences with anime, how you got into the hobby, and what you enjoy about it, and then really kind of prod you for one relevant scene, the maybe your favorite scene or just your favorite moment. I think we've talked about it in the past in written typing, so I've got a couple of suggestions for you if you can't think of anything.
For my favorite.
Yes, I will tell you what your favorite anime scene is.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Um, anyway, yeah, what's your history with the hobby and how did it come about?
Well, first, uh, it's funny to talk about anime as a hobby, right? Because it's like, is television a hobby? Is Are movies a hobby? I know what you
Uh,
mean. It's just funny that we have this whole community built around um consuming media. Like, are books a hobby?
hmm.
Isn't like reading books, watching a book?
I
But
don't know.
so
You bring up a good point, but I would more equate it to something like the Green Lantern TV series, or not. They didn't make a Green
yeah.
Lantern TV series.
Oh,
Green
my
Arrow
my
TV
brother actually
series.
writes that series, by the way.
Oh
That's
yeah,
yeah,
is he an
he just
actor?
wrote what?
You said he read for that, which
No,
means
no,
oh
he
shit, no
writes for that
way.
series. Yeah, he just wrote the new Lego Batman movie
What?
too. Um,
What? Oh
yeah,
man, that's amazing.
yeah,
Wow. We need to
he's pretty
interview
into it.
him.
Yeah,
Wow,
you
shit.
should. I
Set
mean,
up an
I'm sure he.
interview. Because like we do a whole lot of
Screw
criticism.
this
No,
noise.
yeah, yeah. Fuck you. Get
No,
the real cool guy on here.
I get it.
Um, but no, we do a lot of criticism, right? And then you very quickly, I think one of the differences between a review and a critique is that the critique implies ways something could be done better. And then you very quickly get into this space where, like, well, if you didn't like this show, why don't you write it better? And that's the type of stuff I would love to talk to somebody who actually has made money or been employed writing creatively.
Yeah. Well, he definitely he has writing as a skill that he honed intentionally. Like, he's not a natural writer, I would say, but he practiced enough that now he's a great, he's really good at churning out scripts and stuff. And so he'd be a pretty good guy to talk to.
Oh man,
But
we'll set that up
um,
later. That'll
yeah, yeah, yeah.
stay
And I
tuned.
agree with you with that critique thing. A lot of people mistake well written reviews for critiques, and
Mhm.
the language between them is being shared more and more, because it's easy to come off like an authority if you
Mhm.
say like specific things that sound like a critique. But if it's just like, oh, I didn't like the way the hair was moving in between the keyframes here,
Yeah.
and you're like, well, that's not really a critique, that's just your opinion, but you said it with enough technical knowledge that it makes you sound like a critique. And
That's the
um,
story of my internet career. Oh God, summed up in one little bit.
yeah,
Uh,
there's this weird neo like illiterati sort
w-
of like academism, gatekeeping, and reviews.
Right,
But
right, right. And that's the thing. The internet came along, and now everybody can write a piece, and everybody's a critic. And then nobody really
everyone's an
knows what that
English major.
means. And you used to have this day where you would go and you would go to the schools or the philosophy or the person, Roger Ebert would be employed in this facility, and then he would tell you how things are, and then he's official critic. And nowadays, somebody writes something on a Reddit post, and you can't tell. I'm just saying there's
No, no, no.
something for that
I get
gatekeeper.
this is actually a point I brought up on Reddit one time in Change My View, and I was basically like, the technology has made people share more stupid opinions, and now people are getting dumber, and this whole sort of
Right.
thing. And the counterpoint which was brought up, which I think is relevant here, is that these things have always existed, and as a result of having the internet now, we just see them in more prevalence. And
Mhm.
so, like, yeah, Roger Ebert is or was a great reviewer because he paid attention to the craft, because he respected the craft and things like that. But for every Roger Ebert, there are like five more movie reviewers. You can open up the I don't know, Podunk Times, and they've
Mhm.
got like an official movie reviewer, and they don't really know what they're talking about, but
And
they're
it
hired in that capacity.
so it places the burden on the reader or the consumer or the browser, the person seeing all these things to really say, well, what do I really know about this person, or where does this person come from? What are the biases inherent here, or are they even attempting to do criticism, which
Sure.
is.
What am I trying to learn from what they're writing? What
Mhm.
and how are they helping me do that? There's a
And
lot of like passive absorption of information, and yeah, people need to be more active, I think, in looking for and appraising what they're reading.
Yeah, and I don't think the population in general has really caught up um, to that
To
fact yet.
anime reviews.
Yeah, yeah. Well, fucking Bob does employed. Don't give me. I can't.
Well, no, okay. To be fair to that guy, as much as like we both have personal disagreements with him, he does, you know, I think he occupies that sort of that space in discourse that in academia might be referred to as white guy space.
I don't
In
even
terms
know
of
what that means. Go ahead, explain
I,
that.
I just mean in terms of like he goes out of his way to be accommodating, I think, to alternate point of views in
Mm,
ways he doesn't have to. And I think he really does put forth an effort into like his craft of reviewing things. and
yes.
and my only issue with him is that I personally believe there's a burden of responsibility on reviewers or people of influence to sort of vet their opinions through a filter of intellectual honesty. And I don't think he necessarily does that. I think at the end of the day he's like, well, I'm writing a personal review, so I'm just going to say what I want, and if people get something out of that I don't intend, then that's not really my problem. Which is
Mm.
like it's a fair position, but I also think that it's a little irresponsible, and that's only my only grief, because he writes good stuff. I think he
Yeah,
writes good
yeah, yeah,
stuff.
yeah. And I've read a lot of articles, even pieces that aren't reviews, that I've really gotten something out of. Um, but
But
yeah.
to get back to your original question
let's not
20 minutes
let's
ago.
not throw shade all over the internet. Actually, no,
Yeah,
we should
yeah.
start a feud. No, no,
Yeah,
no, no. It's wonderful. What we're gonna do is we're gonna start beef, and then it's gonna get really popular. And any publicity is good publicity. And then we're gonna get really
yes,
popular, and then we'll get positions.
yes.
Uh,
Like our great overlord Donald Trump. You
yes,
can't have bad publicity.
exactly.
Just feeds you and makes you stronger.
I don't.
Um, but
Oh.
but so we were talking about anime as a hobby, and I was just gonna say that I think I would make the distinction in saying that anime is in this country. I mean, I guess in all places, but in this country especially, it's a subculture. So
Hmm.
whereas if you're into anime in Japan, you're really just into animation, which in this country would be like having there's a magazine that my mom gets because she was part of the industry movie stuff, but it's like kids screen or something, but it's a trade magazine for animation. So if you're an animator, you're looking at trade magazines, whereas if you're an anime fan, you're into an entirely different subculture. And in Japan, if you were to say, I'm into anime, you would also be looking at trade magazines, I think, more than you'd be looking necessarily at like being an otaku, a fan of things. But in this country, anime implies the otaku fan culture, right?
Right. So you're differentiating the medium from what we deem as the anime subculture. So, um, for the purposes of what we're going to be talking about here, we can talk about either one, but
Well, I'm just saying because my answer is going to be Pokemon. If you say what's
I
your first experience with anime, and I'm like, oh, Pokemon and like weird
Disney,
cuts of
yeah.
Sonic,
Um, God,
Voltron, defender of the universe or whatever, and that's
should
I
we?
there's a distinction, right, between Pokemon and maybe even like Dragon Ball Z and what we consider anime, what we consider the anime culture. It's beyond the shonen stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not to say that and look, I love shonen stuff. I'm the hugest proponent of Boku no Hero Academia, and I'm always a Naruto apologist, and Bleach is like one of my favorite manga. So like,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm into the shonen stuff, but I think in terms of what you can call what you when you talk about anime, when you talk, and I've always held this position because everyone gets into arguments about Japanimation and versus
Mm-hmm.
is it from Japan? Does that qualify it as anime? Is it made by Japanese people? Is it meant to be consumed by a Japanese audience? And there are certain qualities, but I think what anime can really distinguishes when we're talking about anime, when we're talking about what we're interested in, especially the two of us here, and I think a lot of quote unquote anime fans, especially people on true anime, they're interested in the fact that anime creates a sort of believable alternate reality, right? There's the presumption
Mm-hmm.
of a realism, even if it's not our physical, our reality, it's a reality. There's a and it's not just cartoon space reality. It's not like anything can happen. It's their specific rules laid out, and people
Mm.
get really into that.
So, I think I don't know if that feels limiting to me. That feels like uh, you can't have something outside those rules that you've set down be anime. And
Well, it's different. It's anime with multiple definitions. It's like I'm watching Tiger Mask right now, and I'm a huge fan of
uh
Tiger Mask. Would I
sure.
call it anime? I would say it's like anime as fuck, but is it what you would turn on and be like, look, mom, this is anime? Or would you be like, this is a cartoon? This is a cartoon from
And
Japan I like. You know, the guy's flipping tigers upside down in the middle of the woods, and he's like, it's cartoonish. It's
yeah,
it's absurd.
that goes back to my original argument when we had these big arguments back on the subreddit of what is anime, that it's visual narrative storytelling, and that the
That's
coherent
just Phil. What are you
narrative, huh?
talking about?
No,
It's like
that but that differentiates it from something. The word anime inherently is used to, when somebody says, you can't just say I like cartoons, because then the person's like, yeah, SpongeBob's great. What's your favorite episode? And then, but you don't have that conversation. So we needed a separate word to exclude all the SpongeBob people.
well. If you look at it, so because cartoon refers to the art style, right? Cartoon is like a
Does
cartooning of
it?
something. It's
Whoa, 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 whoa! Cartoon can have the same thing as anime, where it's a
no,
subculture
no, no,
too,
no, no.
or
Like
that it's certain. It
cartoons imply that the focal and look, I'm not saying that this is like you can pull anyone off the street and say it, but I'm saying if you look at the category, if you distill down what we call cartoons, if you put them all together, you're like, what's the commonality here, what's the common thread?
sure.
You will and cartoons are called cartoons because the main thrust of what you're watching or engaging in is the fact that it's a cartooning. It's the cartooning of reality. It's an absurd rendering
Oh, it's like
of
a
reality.
clown
It's
performance,
right.
or
It's an exaggeration. That's what cartooning is. It's an art style. You take like a Jew and you make a giant nose, and it's a
jeez.
cartoon of a Jew. You
But
know.
but then I think of things like that are definitively anime, like the panty and stocking that I'm going to send to somebody, that do these things, that have, maybe it
And I
has
would argue
cartoony
that maybe they're
influences.
cartoons. I haven't seen Penny
Okay.
Stock and Garter Belt, but maybe it's a cartoon. Maybe you can call it a cartoon. And the ones that
It,
really tread that line are like Trigger,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
Gainax, for example.
More Western influence things, and
Yeah,
I kind of
and
understand your
they're
point.
willing, and if you notice, they're willing to incorporate cartooning into their work, which is why they have such strong gestural qualities in their art, because cartooning emphasizes the
Hmm.
motion in a figure, you know.
So what
But
is
I would
what is animeing
Well,
then?
so I'm just saying like the focus of a cartoon is to be a cartoon. It's to be an exaggeration of a form or figure, whatever. Whereas if you look at anime, I would say that the focus is on the thematic intent. It's on the narrative. It's
Sure.
on using whatever cartoon you have is going to be um subservient to the narrative, which is why you can end a cartoon on a ridiculous note. You can be like, oh well, it turns out like he was a monster for real, and he was pretending to be a human, pretending to be a monster. Oh, that's all wrapped up, no one cares. But in an anime, you have to end a story. You have to end it properly. You have to end with like, oh no, this was his brother seeking revenge. The end. It's like a serious narrative. It takes itself seriously in terms of the story it's trying to tell.
Boy. Okay, first off, you just described the ending to Panty and Stocking. Second off,
Well, okay.
there's tons of stuff like a Golden Boy or something, just that doesn't conform to any of those
Sure.
types of
Sure,
standards or
sure. I mean, and
people.
I've always been. I mean, you look at Legend of Korra. You look at Well, I've been watching Gravity Falls and Adventure
Mhm.
Time. Even like a lot of these things that and they uncannily adhere to a narrative principle, which is, by the way, I think those defining features. If you look at like Adventure Time, if you look at Gravity Falls, if you look at Steven Universe, maybe those things to a lesser extent, the latter two, but definitely those that category of cartoons and their popularity, a lot of it has to do with how seriously they take their own narrative. It has to do with how much they're willing to take their own story seriously.
Right.
And maybe Panty Stocking and Garter Belt, again, I haven't seen it. Maybe it swings between those two. Something like Fooly Cooly, which swings between a real story and a cartoon. Honestly, it swings back and forth. Sometimes the consequences matter, sometimes they don't. But in the end, it's to tell the narrative. It's to tell a theme. There's a theme behind it. There's something there.
Thematic. Okay, if we land on the theme, then I can deal with your definition because
Of
that's
course you
all.
can. Of
Yeah,
course you
no,
can.
no.
I mean, Monica is amazing.
Yeah, Monica, 10 out of 10. Yeah.
Um, I mean, and
So
I don't mean to be prescriptive. I'm just saying, like, in terms of a more,
no,
if we're
yeah,
going to be talking about categories of things, if we're going to be talking about subcultures, if we're going to be talking about these things, then it helps to beforehand talk about what goes into making those categories seem like what they are.
sure, and it's a discussion that we need to have in this day and age with Tori Kaiser, with Ruby, with all the Western stuff, and with stuff that is more influenced by Western stuff in anime in general. As it
Yeah,
becomes more
Inferno
popular,
which is greatest
yeah,
anime of all time.
yeah, yeah, we're back on Trigger. Little Witch Academia too, though. Oh my, or not
Oh
two, but
yeah, yeah,
the series.
yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah, definitely a Disney. Well, I mean, even Tezuka,
So
coming out at the bat, he was like, "Oh, Disney, Disney,
yeah,
Disney,
yeah, yeah,
Disney."
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. And Miyazaki too is kind of lumped in the anime, but not really anime. Even
well,
though
okay, and
he has the whole narrative, the whole entire other world, the whole taking it seriously.
okay, well, so let's. This is a great segue into actually answering the question.
I was gonna bring it back to
the
Pokemon. I was getting
the
there, but
first, well, no, because I don't think, because to me, my first experience with what I would consider anime, my first time I was recognizing that, oh, this is a medium apart from other media. This isn't necessarily just a style of um of maybe animation, but this is something that has certain cultural tropes, certain unique qualities to it that are very apparent. Because Dragon Ball Z, while it's unique, can seem, the cartooning. What's his name? Toriyama's cartooning is cartooned enough that you can weave it into normal like Western media and say like, okay, that's a thing. And of course, if you
yeah.
replace all the references to sushi with donuts, it's you can be like, oh, it's Western.
I'd
But
argue that
um,
one though. I'd argue that when we're 9 or 10 years old watching Toonami after school, that you understood that the plot was important or that the coherency of the entire show meant something in Dragon Ball Z, whereas you,
but Dragon Ball Z is so, like, and I say this
I
with the
get
utmost
you,
respect, but Dragon Ball Z is very over the top. It's
yeah.
very absurd in its sort of handling of realism, and to that extent, it exists in like this weird space where it's like, yeah, it's serious that Cell is gonna kill everybody, but the solution is to make a giant energy ball the size of like 3 planets and dunk it on his head. I mean, it's
Wow.
absurd in its scope, to the point where it's a cartoon of action.
Oh, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
Mm.
and that's the only like I it's serious, but it's also not serious because people are throwing punches like their punches are cartoon, their kicks are
That's not
cartoon, you know.
fair. That's not fair. It's always treated as extremely, extremely reverent in the whole show. Like it doesn't. It takes itself
Sure, the
very
show
seriously.
takes
So
itself seriously,
now, if you're
but
talking
it's
Dragon Ball, maybe a little more. Yeah.
Dragon. But that's what I'm. If Dragon Ball were, that's what I'm. I think Dragon Ball, the original Dragon Ball, is more anime than Dragon Ball Z, which and that's really strange to say, but because Dragon Ball Z is always at like a level 8 of tension, it's always
Yeah.
at this level of tension, and it really doesn't, and all that tension rests on an absurd mythos. It's not,
But
and again,
isn't
like,
isn't
I
that
say
what you're
this with
talking about
respect,
with the
but
narrative of the coherence and the togetherness, or isn't that what you were just talking about as
are
identifiers
you
of
serious?
anime?
Goku running down Snake Road, like, are you
All
like
right, you
that's
picked one of the least serious things in the entire show. Okay,
and it's the consequence of his death. And is the consequence of his death is he runs a
yeah,
triathlon? Are you
yeah,
serious?
just the
And he
fact
goes
that
to a
you had to
bathhouse?
no,
Like
no, it's
what?
just the fact that you had to know that he died and now he's dead and now he's running to meet King Kai and then he meet King Kai and then he's like, how did he get here? He ran down Snake Road.
Yeah, and
Just that fact.
it sounds like a children's cartoon.
Oh,
It's
you are.
absurd. It
So it's
sounds
not the moment to moment things then. It's not the because Dragon Ball has a lot of cartoony moments with.
Yes, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. Because like, look at. In fact, in Western style cartoons and things you would consider comedy, in those cartoons, you will see moments of, I forget what it's called, bathos, I guess, where it's you have really serious moments all of a sudden, like, oh my god, if Patrick gets turned, taken into the sun, he's gonna die, so I have to save him. SpongeBob says, and it's a very
That's not.
serious moment in the moment to
That's
moment, but it's overall a comedy. It's overall, because of the absurdity of the situation, it's coded as a comedy.
that
Um,
there's no dramatic weight in SpongeBob, and this title of this is going to be Seifuu misrepresents SpongeBob.
okay, okay, no, I can, okay, that's I can respect that point of view. All I'm saying is that Dragon Ball Z does not do enough to code violence in a real fashion as to make it separate from a cartooning of violence.
This
There's
is an arbitrary designation. I think it does plenty.
I,
That's
all right. I mean, I'm just like, there's not like, look, compare the violence in Dragon Ball Z to the violence in Cowboy Bebop, right? Just compare between the two the sort of severity and realism that's gone into the violence.
it's just fantasy. You're just saying it has fantasy, so it's a cartoon like that.
No, no, I'm saying it has exaggerated fantasy. Like when people get hurt in Dragon Ball Z, they either just look like they got like bruised or their arms are coming off. And it's kind of like absurd. It's kind of a cartoonish rendition of violence.
Okay, so
Except when you have things like the androids come in and they're getting like, physically dismembered in a way that's reminiscent of like Akira, and there's like all this like seriousness to it. And I'll concede that the android arc is much more like anime like than the rest of the series, but there's so much of the series that's just cartoonish. When people die, they blow up, and when people get injured, either they're like, super duper like dismembered, or they're barely visibly injured at all. They just like, they're whining on the ground about being beat up. You're like, oh, my power levels down, oh god, and they're just like whining on the ground. And it's not like it's not the same as when Spike Spiegel takes like an errant shot to the arm and he's like bleeding and he's like, oh god, I can't aim, and it's like a serious issue based off of a very small injury, which is like real life, which is like realism, when you have those things. But
that's just some slider that you have personally that's like this much realism is acceptable. The fact that people live on Mars is acceptable, but the fact that people can, channel their chi and fly, that is not acceptable. Like
No, no, I'm
what is
saying it's
that?
the cartooning of it. I'm saying it's the fact that there aren't really any systems or metrics given within the show outside of like a power level thing that to me makes it seem like a cartooning of violence. And I'll say the same thing about like early 80s movies, where there's a difference between Rambo slicing some guy's neck open on camera and shooting him with a stick of dynamite on a bow and arrow and watching him blow up. One is it's a power fantasy. One is a markedly like this absurd cartooning of real violence, and one of them has a more representation of someone who is, uncharacteristically, maybe cartoonishly competent at violence, but it's still like real violence.
Okay,
And
so you would say Predator is anime.
I would say it has more in common with anime than something like Taken. Yeah,
Okay.
I
Okay.
I
Gotcha.
would
Gotcha.
I would
Gotcha.
definitely agree with that, and it's because of those cartoonish elements.
Sure.
It's because of
Alien anime.
well, parts of it, right?
Yeah.
But parts
Right.
of it are very serious, and parts of it are very
Well,
seriously
that's what you're
represented. And
saying.
I,
Anime.
I
You
would say
somehow equated anime to seriousness,
no, no,
or
no.
like.
I'm just saying that there is a characteristic of what I would consider anime and what I would consider important to the anime culture that I think deals with seriousness, which is
Mhm.
why a lot of anime fans are teenage people saying like I don't watch cartoons, but I watch anime.
Yeah.
I don't watch kiddie stuff, but I watch the serious cartoons. I watch the things,
Yeah.
Attack on Titan, for
I
example.
I absolutely agree with you. And once again, this is a great discussion to have because
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's all. I mean, again, it's not prescriptive. It's not like I'm not drawing lines in the sand. I'm saying this is anime, this is not anime. You're an anime fan, you're not an anime fan. I'm just saying that when we're discussing these things, we have to look at the commonalities, the common threads and stuff. And that gets back to the discussion on critique. It gets back to the discussion on like, is something successful? Is something successfully serious? Is it not? And how do we portray that and what are we trying to do with it? But to
right.
get back to answering the question of whether or
I
not
mean,
of what my experience with anime was, it was the Digimon Tamers OVA, and
where
that's
did you
why I was talking about
where did
seriousness. I was
where,
talking about these things.
where did you first encounter the Digimon Tamers OVA?
It was a VHS because back in my day, and I think back in your day, we used to watch those things, those cassette tapes, and it was a
Yeah.
VHS, and it was I'm sure like bargain bin from Blockbuster, and I had watched Digimon on Fox, and these were this was it was called the Digimon movie in the America in the Americas in the US. But
Not
what it really was a packaging of three OVAs from the first three series. Um,
uh,
I'm not sure if are you familiar with any
I
of that?
see. Man, I was big into Pokemon, and I'll tell you, when I saw that Digimon, I was like, Psh, this is second-rate shit.
Get that
So,
weak shit out of here.
yeah,
Get
no,
that.
I didn't respect it. Even though I hear it was really great, and a lot of people really enjoyed it.
Yeah. No, no. I
I could
mean,
I could sing the theme song. Digimon, digital monsters, Digimon are the champion. Yeah,
Digivolve into Ultimate.
yeah,
Digivolve into Super Awesome Ultimate. Yeah.
nostalgia.
Um. Yeah. So, but the thing is if you watch those OVAs, well, first off, I think Hideaki Anno was in charge of the direction of season three of Digimon, or what
What?
we considered
Are you
season three. And this one,
serious?
yeah, no, it's super dark. So
Are we looking this up? Do we have to fact check
yeah,
this?
fact check using the internet. There's like some what is it? Is it real? Is it?
I gotta
Am
look
I
it up. Keep going, keep
wishfully
going. Sorry to
wishfully?
interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, no. Well, yeah, I'll keep talking. You keep researching. It's the beauty of
Sure.
having a
Yeah.
duo. But so the Digimon OVAs followed in the vein of that sort of season three um play on monsterdom, because as you know, as we're saying, Pokemon was really big at the time, and whether intentionally or not, Digimon chose to go emphasize the monster root of it. And so the OVAs for Digimon are really serious, and they're serious in a way that I think only maybe season three and one arc of season one of Digimon, and I'm making myself sound like a Digimon fan, but I haven't watched it past season four. But there's nothing wrong with being a Digimon fan. I'm just saying to represent myself accurately. But the OVAs are really serious business. They're really like the animation is really crisp and smooth as you would expect from the OVAs, any OVA, and especially of that period because they have a budget all of a sudden. And the plots are all like, a Digimon digi teleported into our real city and it's
Yeah,
gonna
sure.
digi kill everybody,
Yeah.
if we don't subdue it. And it's not like, oh, it's gonna digi kill everybody by sucking out their like eternal souls in some like cartoonish way. It's like, no, it's like shooting fireballs into storefronts and like kids are screaming on the street you know
So it was your first taste of violence.
well, it was my first taste of like cartoons are serious business essentially because that
Mm.
because in the Digimon TV show and in a lot of anime, it's like it takes place in a fictional world where violence is not that big a deal, or it's par for the course. There's no real sense of danger, and whatever it is, it's like, oh no, Ash fell into the skeleton room. He'll have to use Pikachu to
the,
climb out, and they'll
the,
use the power of friendship.
r-
And
there
and
were
this Digimon thing was like, I'm a kid, I'm asleep in bed, and this giant eyeball's outside my window. Oh God, what is that? It's like a 20-story tall Agumon, and it's like fighting a giant parrot monster, and like no one knows what's going on, and like the news is freaking out, and everyone's freaking out, and all this kinds of stuff.
Right. I think what you're talking about is the sense of stakes, that there's actually meaningful repercussions. There's actually something negative that can happen, which in so much of the media of that age, especially that which we were exposed to, there just wasn't that for children. There wasn't a fact that, bad things can happen and then it's gonna suck. And like it just that's such a novel idea that I understand why you attach to it right there.
Right.
I'd also love to point out here that Hideaki Anno had nothing to do with Digimon.
Okay, well there was someone attached to Digimon season 3
All right, hold
that and
on.
there was
What, Digimon Tamers?
Digimon Tamers. There was
Yeah.
something about Digimon Tamers. There was something unique where you're like, "Excuse me?" Like it was way too serious business, especially considering like the previous seasons, which were all very lighthearted. And season 3, I'm pretty sure like one of the main characters was either molested or like their parents had died or something like
Oh
really
my god.
unusually traumatic had happened to
Wow.
them.
So you hit on a great point because with this, and I think that really clarifies what you were talking about with seriousness, or and I'd rather just call it stakes. That something's at stake. Um,
Okay, well, I'd rather call it lamb chops. No,
I
Dish.
watched Lamb Chop as a child. May she rest in
Oh yeah,
peace.
oh, I forgot that was an actual shit. My pun. No, he died.
Yes,
Okay.
but I recognized the same type of thing when I was watching Sailor Moon on Toonami. That same type of thing where it's like, holy shit! Like, there's not only is there's continuous story where there's more people are introduced, but like the guy gets captured and then she feels bad about it, and it's not resolved in one episode, and and Tuxedo Mask is gone, and she has to deal with her feelings here. And I'm like, what? How
Well, I
did,
mean, Tuxedo Mask is a general bum, but yeah.
come on,
I love Tuxedo
with a
Mask.
little more
But yeah,
respect
that's
towards
the
the
point. It's like he
series.
doesn't come to the
Yes,
rescue. He really
the,
doesn't. He's a love object, but for the most part, he's freaking useless in terms of the narrative.
yeah, sure, but there are stakes for Usagi for not, or Serena at the time, for not feeling, or for failing to save him.
Right, right, and that gets to the Japanese title having senshi, right? Bishoujo Senshi,
Yeah,
Sailor
yeah, yeah,
Moon,
yeah.
where she's a soldier. She's literally like considered a warrior in like this war of good versus evil, like a sort of like paladin role. Um,
Sure. Yep.
yeah, and
Uh,
and that's a large part of the stakes there. Yeah, because and Sailor Moon is notable for really taking that seriously. Yeah, totally.
yeah, and
It's
just I want to again say that there was nothing else, no media that expressed that, nothing else that showed it to us as young children back in the, you know, late '90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, there was a great anime did a great service by being like a weird foreign import that people just brought in for cheap bucks, and then it turned out there was like
Yeah,
thematic content to it.
yeah. Thank
Uh,
you so much.
yeah.
Uh, I I'm so happy to have been born in this age because then, a lot of people don't
Yeah.
have that. A lot of people, but nowadays, I worked with people. I worked with 18-year-old kids that would tell me where they were when Sozin's Comet aired, and they're like, they understand that animated works and works in general can just be for kids and also have a serious narrative and thematic throughput.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And I'm always excited by works like Avatar and Korra, and as I was saying earlier, like Gravity Falls, and
Hmm.
I mean, Gravity Falls maybe to a lesser extent, but like Adventure Time and maybe Steven Universe works that seek to bridge those. I mean, okay, let's be honest. I've been watching
Or
the Venture Brothers on like repeat for like a while, and that's one of
that's
my favorite
that's
shows.
not for kids.
But what I'm saying is like animation as a medium is finally in this country, in the United. For all our listeners, we're from the USA. Spoilers. Uh,
If you couldn't tell.
in this country, we're getting to a point of more seriousness. Um, and there's nothing wrong, like, because previously I think we've been a really nice like a garden for animators, like a lot
Mm.
of work done on Ren and Stimpy, a lot of work done on
N-
The whole Nickelodeon block at the turn of the century was very good for animation as a
yeah,
medium, I would say, as
but
a form of creative expression,
but
cartooning.
fucking Walt Disney
Um,
and Tex Avery set us back.
but yeah, there's not a lot of the narratives that were put forth were so banal. They're so just
Yeah,
like there
milk
to
toast.
service the creative whims of the art
Yeah.
directors. Um,
Yeah, and
and the
that's such a
best,
bummer because it's
yeah,
such a
right,
great way for storytelling, and you not even storytelling for adults, for children, for romance, for drama, for y- it's
right,
just
right. I mean, just look at oh my god, he's dead, and I feel bad for not remembering his name, and he's amazing, and he did Millennium Actress and Paprika,
Cone,
and huh?
Satoshi Kon.
Yeah, Satoshi Kon. Yeah, look at Satoshi Kon. Look at like what he basically made movies
Yeah,
using anime. Like he
yeah,
used
yeah,
all of
yeah.
the techniques of editing and shooting and cinematography that are unique to, live action film, and then he used animation as a gap, as a bridge gap, as a way to
Absolutely.
bridge the
And
gap there.
even
And
he even more than anyone else really showed that little extra that you could do with animation that would be either hard or virtually impossible to do with live
right.
action.
Right. And you can do things in the narrative that it's like you can't do with our current
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
technologies of CGI because it just breaks immersion because it's so I just watched Captain America Civil War, and I'm going to I come off like so unpopular, but but
Okay.
the Captain America Civil War is a great example of like there's so much CGI and none of it is used to tell a story. It's all just used to accent the drama of special effects, and that really it does nothing. It does nothing. And the heart of the story is left untouched and is sort of weakened by the fact that all of this like amazing CGI is going into action sequences. And then when it comes down to the heart of the story, it's there's nothing there.
You
It's not used in that fashion. It's not used to tell a story. It's just used to be like, wow, bigger explosions. Oh, Iron Man's longer transformation sequence. But that's not why people watch movies. That's not why people listen to stories. That's not, it's the narrative is the important part.
you
At the end.
cannot see me nodding slowly across the internet, but that's absolutely 100% how I feel. It's a sad, I think it's a sad state that we live in. That uh, this is the reality. This is what making money. Um, and also, it's the reason I haven't bought a ticket for any blockbuster in years, years and years. Not since like
Yeah.
Spider-Man 2 really had the heart of the character drama at its core.
And was
Um,
also a terrible movie.
Spider-Man 2? You
well,
like Spider-Man 2? Well, okay,
also
original
I should say
Spider-Man.
that I'm a fan of spectacle nonetheless. Like I understand that it's a thing. I just agree that with the lament that it is the dominant force in our media.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
like
yeah.
I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with spectacle. I enjoyed the Expendables. I enjoy spectacle. I'm a fan of those things, but I do think that it's so prevalent that people just equate it with story. When
Yep,
they go to see a movie, they're like,
yep.
if it doesn't have big budget effects, then it's not a good movie. And you're like, well,
Yeah, and I think
I don't
many
agree with that.
Americans don't know or care to differentiate between them, and that's sort of the tragedy of the situation that we're in right now.
I mean, yeah, I've had this. So my one of my art teachers in college, he was lamenting the loss of calligraphy as an art form. He was like, saying essentially like, people don't learn how to write properly with ink anymore, and that's a huge shame. And I think this is like a maybe a similar or at least related argument, because I agree with that sentiment personally, but I also think that as those things leave, other things come in to fill the gap, and it's not like
I get what you're
it's
saying. Like you,
impossible to have those little things.
yeah, like your calligraphy teacher should really be into memes and just the artistry of creating a good meme because
I'm
that
saying
it
there
just
is an
sort of
artistry there.
pushed
I'm
it
saying
out.
that equivalent to the amount of time some
Yeah.
like podunk Japanese dude spent figuring out how to get ink to flow from a brush, there are a lot of people out there trying to figure out how to like tweak the reaction face at
Yeah,
a
yeah,
certain
yeah,
angle
yeah, yeah,
to get a more
yeah,
visceral
yeah,
reaction.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know, and so I agree, and I think narratology is very important, and I think it is separate from calligraphy because there is something about narrative that is necessary for stories, and it's always necessary for stories, so we have to pay attention. But in terms of lamenting the sort of pushing aside of narrative. I
So,
personally agree, but I also think that there's other good stuff coming out as a result of that. I think
wow,
we're seeing a
okay.
lot more farce. I think we're seeing a lot more parody. We're seeing 2 hour movies that are essentially just meta jokes like 21 Jump Street, which is amazing. And
Sure.
it's all just one big farce, you know?
Okay, okay. I think I understand what you're saying because it really sounded like you were saying storytelling is passé or worthless or
No, no, no.
old
I look,
hag.
I like storytelling. I just watched what was that movie with the freaking Nocturnal Animals? I just watched Nocturnal Animals yesterday. And Nocturnal Animals, for peeps not in the know, and I wasn't in the know either until I watched it, is a movie that is literally 2 hours of cinematography in complete service to a narrative. It's 2 hours of like three stories woven together, and they use match cuts to like weave between the stories, and like all the length of the shots is directly in relation to the tension the protagonist is feeling. Like it's
Mm,
literally just it's a neo noir as it's classified. So every single part of the visual language is in service to the story, to the storytelling. Nothing about it is really spectacle. It's just all in service of the
uh,
narrative. And it won awards. I'm sure it's going to go to the Oscars. I'm sure it's going to get something there. And it was really well received by critics. So I don't think storytelling is dead or passe. I'm just saying I think it's moved away. There's a larger divide in pop culture between a movie people go to see in general and a movie that actually seeks to tell a story, that goes out of its
yes.
way to tell a compelling story.
Uh,
uh,
but in our, capitalist world doesn't getting pushed to the side, doesn't that being separated just means one of the smaller one will die off?
no, people get bored and then it comes back. Look at Uptown Funk. It's funk is making a comeback thanks to Bruno Mars, because people get bored and they're like, "Oh yeah, I loved funk, and now funk's coming back." I mean,
Okay, so we're in the
Alice in
nadir of
Chains.
storytelling.
What's that?
We're in the nadir right now. There's going to be an
Um,
upswing.
yeah, and the thing is too is like as it contracts, you get less shitty storytelling. Like you forget that like the corollary of storytelling being popular is a lot of people telling really bad stories
Yeah.
and having to sift through that. Whereas like now it's like if something is an art film, if something is like a story film, I'm pretty sure I'm going to enjoy it, because the people who do that kind of stuff are the fans, the people who actually like take the time to invest in it. They're not trying to make a quick buck, they're doing it because they love it, you
Sure,
know.
sure. Can we not
Um
apply this to anime as well?
well, and let's let's bring it back to the actual topic of your whole freaking show instead of just, jerking each other off about cinema. Yeah. Um Well, and we make a distinction between, and a lot of people are complaining about moe shows and moe this and moe that, and to that I would just say like, look, man, now it's moe, and in the 90s it was like garbage action, and in the
Yeah.
80s it was like dudes killing other dudes, and
Yep.
in the 70s, it's like every generation has junk media made by people who just want to make that media.
Yep.
um like I personally, being like a huge fan of Ghost in the Shell, look at Psychopaths as like a huge, you know uh insult almost. I'm like, why would you make this? Why would you try to make a worse version of Ghost in the Shell with like all these stupid tropes just to capitalize
Psych.
on the fact that everyone wants more Matrix,
You're picking on the wrong point there. Like, Psychopaths is. At least Psychopaths is a little bit honest with what it's trying to do. I'm
Sure,
thinking more
sure, sure.
along the things of all the isekai, the other world, the
No, but
virtual
see,
reality
I think from
games,
the
and that
perspective
like
of
Sword
people.
Art. No, that Sword
No, no,
Art
no,
Online
but
became
no, no,
big, and
no,
then it's
because
like,
I
give me
think Sword
more.
Art Online, I legitimately think Sword Art Online, especially in its inception. I don't know if that's a real word, or if I just think that's a word because of the movie, but I always use it now. So from its inception, from its conception, from the point it was thought up, I think it was a genuine attempt. I think all these light novel anime are well, not all of them. Obviously, some of them like are terrible, but a lot of them, and Sword Art Online being one of them, I think it was an honest attempt at making that narrative. I think RE0 is an honest attempt at making an isekai psychological narrative. I think these are
Hmm.
all honest attempts, and I think that a lot of the passion of the team shows through. And unfortunately, when they choose what's on the cutting block, they end up choosing the things that aren't making them money in the end, which is why Sword Art Online got progressively worse, and which is why RE0 is like, the pacing has more to do with moe crap than it does with the actual narrative. um and that's why those things end up. But the same way that we can say that because Psycho Pass does genuine things and we have to give it some credit, we can say the same thing about other narratives. you know if you're an isekai
Boy,
fan, I think you're gonna look at Sao and be like, I don't like it, but I can give it credit.
all right. I think you're giving that show way too much credit. Um, and
So then I'm like,
I can very clearly see a distinction between cash grab shows and sort of inspired shows that
but
actually have some heart
I
behind
think
them.
that is a I don't agree. I don't agree that people can be so easily shunted into one category or another. Creators, you know, um,
Mm,
I
sure.
don't think that you can say that just because someone is directing a commercial work that they're not necessarily putting in certain kinds of effort. And I'm not saying there aren't lazy shows out there. A Kamiga Kill, I will always be like, this show is 90% hot garbage. You know, um, they're just, I mean, I don't even
Sure,
watch
sure, sure.
anime because the majority of shows I'm like, okay, there's good stuff in there, but like most of it is not worth sitting
Well,
through
well, a
the
great
stuff
example
for.
of that is one Digimon that you brought up already, but for all the Magical Girl fans out there, Heartcatch Precure. It's just to sell stuff, but that's one of the best Magical Girl shows around. It's got a huge amount of heart and passion behind it. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, so let's distinguish here because we're coming dangerously close to saying like, oh well, certain creators are just passionate and certain creators aren't. Because if we bring up the Bebop example, we could be like, well, see, even like a good director can make amazing stories out of a toy commercial. But I think w- uh, what I was trying to get at is the fact that even someone who is hired on in a commercial capacity can sometimes choose and will succeed in making things that are more a little more than commercial or a little different. There's like a little more artistry to, like, so I, for example, I harp on the Fate series. I harp on the Fate series, and I know the Fate series is popular among people who are fans of like digitally produced works, digital mosaic stuff, digital effects kind of stuff, because that's the kind of visual language that populates those series. And I personally view them and I'm like, well, this is incredibly lazy gesture work covered up by basically expensive CGI effects, which are still cheaper to make than, you know, hand drawn effects. So to me, from a production standpoint, I'm like, this is lazy. This is
mm,
lazy. And that's my critique of it. But at the same time, I do think that the people who made those effects, who were putting in those CG effects, were consciously trying very, very hard to make an artistic use of those effects. You know, it's like a lot of music nowadays is sort of post sample music where you have these people with these samples and all these whatever things that don't sound
yeah.
necessarily that great, but it's about how they use them that entrances people, that makes them think, oh, this is a good artist. It's about how you use this, like, you know uh whatever down toned sample of like a 1980s snare drum that is engaging with people. It's not the quality of the snare drum itself, it's not the quality of the visual effects, it's the fact that ththey're trying to use them to tell a story you know
I think it's kind of hard to see who's passionate and who's not unless you take the work holistically. Um, like, was this little CGI clip inserted with a lot of heart? That's really what you're getting it down to. And I don't know if we can make those decisions or those
well
differentiations.
no, because if you think critique, if you think like, if you think critique from a point of knowledge is a valid point of incursion, it's a valid way of assessing a work, then I
Yeah,
think
you're
you
right.
also have to acknowledge the fact that you can say that certain things are done with more volition than other things. Certain aspects, and like I was saying with Fate Zero, for example, I'm like, so much of the show is rote, so much of the show is copying the style of the visual novels and things like that, but there are points where they didn't have to do this.
Okay,
There are
and
parts where they didn't have to do this and they did it, and they put effort into it and it shows you know
I think I may not be able to speak on that language, or I may not have the background that I need to talk about CGI and animation and those types of lines. because I'm really only concerned with the characters and the writing and the themes.
Well, well, look at those things. Look at
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
little
and
instances
I
you can
do.
tell in a show when someone says a little aside,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
they're
yeah.
like
When,
they
when,
didn't have to say that. They
when,
didn't have,
no, no.
but they
Okay,
did.
best example of this that I always bring up is when
So
in
excited.
episode 9 of Madoka Magica, when
Yeah.
Madoka meets Kyoko, and Kyoko says, maybe if we call her name, we'll be able to, spoilers, change Sayaka back from being a witch. And
Uh,
then she says, she has this one line, it would be like one of those stories where love and justice win, right?
yeah.
And that right there shows you, it's this little bit of character writing, shows you that not only were the writers aware of the entire history of magical girl shows and the themes and everything, but they understood what that meant on a fundamental level that cannot be argued if you have any bit of awareness about that theme.
Okay. I mean, I agree with you, but like, I wouldn't put it in those terms because you just had like a lot of nerds
I
sweatily typing away at their keyboards. Wow, if you look at it from a point of non-realism in media, you could.
oh, I'd be remiss if I didn't
Yeah,
start
no,
that.
but I mean, and props to you guys. Anyone, by the way, anyone who like takes a point of argumentation just to take that point of argumentation, I actually laud. I think that's great. I think it's
Yeah,
great
yeah,
when
me too.
people challenge themselves mentally and try to push for real truth by arguing against what might be not real truth. So,
Sure,
you
sure.
know,
Yeah.
kudos, even though people are now arguing about whether or not there's such a thing as real truth. But
To all the
yes,
advocates,
yeah,
to all the people
and I
advocating
agree
the
with
devil
you.
out there, thank you.
We, yeah, props to Satan. But I agree with you, and I would just say that that's Madoka Magica is an example to me of like the same thing with isekai stuff because I don't like Madoka. I have never liked Madoka. I continue to dislike Madoka, and a lot of that
Sure.
is because I don't watch magical girl shows. I don't watch Mahou Shoujo stuff. I'm not familiar with the language and the tropes and all the things that are being deconstructed and reconstructed throughout Madoka. And so to me, the show comes off like a sort of thrill, a dark thriller version of a sailor show or whatever. And I know that's not the case because we've had this discussion because
Yeah,
you've
no, I
argued
was
with
about to
me
say
over like
we've.
pages and pages, and like I acknowledge it, I accept that. And in the same way, when I'm watching isekai stuff, I'm like, I'm not really sure on this because I watched 3 episodes of Dot Hack Sign. But to a friend
Sure.
of mine who's like really into isekai stuff, he's like, no, this is like interesting. This is actually a subversion.
Okay,
No,
okay,
this is
okay.
yeah. I mean, just get Plakin on this thing, and he starts talking about oh, this thing is interesting. Oh, this thing works off of visual novel tropes. Oh, this is a subversion of that thing, and I'm like, I'll take your word for it. I've played like one pornographic Newgrounds visual novel. I've never played like a real visual novel, so I can't speak to it.
We'll have to do one of these with Plague. But yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The context and anime's so iterative that there's this huge. Were you here for the database argument or the discussion we had with the guy, um, talking about the databases and Ozma? And,
Are you talking about is Ozma the name of the god dude in Sao? And
no, it's the name of the media critic who's talking about.
the dude who was talking about otaku culture, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
agriculture and
yeah,
the
yeah.
database
Um,
theory.
no, what was he all on about?
Yeah, I don't. Well, a whole bunch of stuff. It's the video. Check out like, favorite, and subscribe. Check out my YouTube channel where you can find other videos such as the one we're talking about right now. That I've always wanted to do one of those plugs. Um,
I feel like a real YouTuber.
but yeah, 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 yeah. Just the idea. Ooh, sorry. That there's an anime database of ideas that have been built up over the course of things, and when a new show comes out, maybe they don't make a direct reference, but they pull something from the database, or they change some things around, but they just pull a couple tropes or just various items from this list of things that both the viewer and the creator are familiar with. So in and I kind of prodded him in this way. Is there like a magical girl database? Is there like a Shinbo database or an Ano database that you pull from? When and it gets pretty granular if you keep going, but I do think there is a database that I'm not aware of. I do think there's plenty of databases that n- none of us would have any real insight on. But I can only speak for what I know, and you can only speak for the information that you have. Uh, so why don't you give
No,
us
I'm trans knowledge. I know everything.
you
Well, okay, and
today on Talking with God?
yeah, let me tell you, my son. Well, and not to sound dismissive of someone who does a lot of serious work, and I respect people who do academic research and cite their sources and do all of like the real hard science stuff that we end up getting the sort of feed from, right? We get
Mm,
sort of the runoff of
yeah, yeah.
theories. Um, but what he's talking about to me sounds a lot like what colloquially would be TV tropes, and what in
Yeah,
academia or in social theory is just cultural language. It's just familiarity with the tropes of your subculture,
sure.
right? So like people in punk culture having certain kinds of hairstyles, or knowing what straight edge is, and knowing that that's a subversion of do whatever laissez-faire, you live only one sort of attitude, and the same thing where you're listening to hip hop and you hear an 808 drum machine, and you know what that means, and you know when they use it a certain way that it's a commentary on the use of that drum track, and what it or that synth
Right.
package, and what it means to the medium. So he's saying database, and he's saying it refers to anime, but it's really just every subculture, right, has its
Sure.
own knowledge, has its own stuff. I mean, I'm part of I watch the Game Grumps on YouTube, plug shout out
Oh
to
God,
the
that's
people
its
who don't
own
need any more
subculture.
shout outs.
God. Okay. Yeah. Which.
But there's a lot of in jokes, and there's a lot of references in there that it sounds like absolute nonsense to anybody who's not part of that.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of the humor in that show is self deconstructing. It's sort of like self-referential, self deconstructing. It's parody. MST3K is is a good example of classic forms of that, where you build up a specific. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons, the Bible, religion. I mean, everything has
That's
terminology
that's
and
kind of where we
tropes.
got to, yeah. Where it was like there's a database for just about anything that you can possibly imagine. Sure.
Right. And being an Asian nerd, of course, he referred to it using technological terms, but
Well,
database.
this brings
But
me to my point, and I was really trying to segue hard onto like give me a scene or give me one of your favorite moments in anime that you really understand, whether it's through your experiences, through your familiarity with the database, or just the pure visceral emotion that it got when it hit you. Or
are we saying something that's idiosyncratically anime, like something that's unique to
I
anime?
don't know. I mean, if you want to make a point, make a point.
Well, because like I have like three scenes, and I'm like, well,
Well,
depending
that's what
on
you.
what.
This is kind of what I was thinking when you were talking all about that nonsense with how weighty things feel, or the seriousness of it, or the what did I call it?
Stakes,
The stakes.
the pork
Yes, yeah.
chops.
Give me something that made you understand heavy stakes.
Oh, heavy stakes, so pork chop stuff.
I
Well,
oof.
I would say, golly, Escaflowne, the movie.
Yeah.
There, um, I guess I should say. Well, that whole movie is rife with sort of like. So when you look at Renaissance art, when you look at that kind of art, what you're seeing is people basically taking real life really, really seriously, right? You're
Yeah.
seeing people like look at forms and then paint them in the most dramatic light, pose them in the most evocative poses, put them in the middle of the most intense circumstance. And Escaflowne the movie is sort of an equivalent. I'm not, people are always saying it's Renaissance art. I mean, it's pretty good, but I'm saying the strain of thought that went into it was basically, we're going to take Escaflowne, which is this sort of hybrid shojo shonen romantic fantasy, and we're going to treat it as if it's like the most serious thing ever. And so as a result, you end up seeing like like all of the scenes, all of the violence in Escaflowne is incredibly visceral. It's incredibly visceral too because it's a take on the show. So if you're used to the show and you're used to like, oh, Vaughn has magic powers. He's the only one who can pilot the dragon mech and save our nation. Like it's sort of like it's like Super Robo. It's kind of goofy in a sense, and it's still cool. There's still politics, but there's like a light filter of like romanticism over it. But when you're watching the movie, they very clearly were like, hey, you remember when stuff happened in Akira and everyone was like, that's super intense? We're going to do that for this thing. So when Vaughn has magic superpowers in the movie, it's not just like he can telepathically communicate with his giant mech. It's like he can like rend the world in twain and people are just playthings. So there's a particular scene where Vaughn, if you're not familiar with Escaflowne, these are spoilers, but it's also like, here's the plot. Vaughn, the main male character, is the rightful heir to this magical kingdom throne of people who like protect their kingdom with giant mechs called Escaflowne. Or at least the name of the main mech is Escaflowne. They're these giant dragon mechs that transform. And Vaughn, specifically being a member of that royal lineage, has some sort of bloodline spiritual magic powers that are related to that because this is a magical world. And in the narrative, there are pretenders to the throne. There are other aristocratic families with various degrees of magic powers. And one of them is like this punk ass kid with a horse. And he's like, I'm going to be the next king of the jungle and I'm going to use my magic powers and so forth and so on. And he's very, he's been raised throughout the narrative to believe that he's powerful. He's sort of the liquid snake of this narrative where he's like, you will be the Ubermensch kind of guy. So he walks onto the battlefield and Vaughn is like, this sort of Aragorn figure where he's a sort of disgraced king, or he's not recognized by a lot of people, so he's all muddy and dirty and he's coming up and he's running up the hill and this guy's standing on his horse on top of the hill and he's like, you're so pitiful, you're not fit to rule this kingdom. And he starts a psychic battle with Vaughn. And if this were the regular show, he would, they would both jump into their mechs and Vaughn would be like, Escafrone, lend me your power, and then like punch him in the face, and there'd be but in the movie, they both just stare at each other like that scene from Akira where they're like psychic babies, and in about 5 seconds, Vaughn rips the guy's horse in half with his mind. And it's all like drawn in visceral reality, like there are horse guts flying everywhere. And this kid is like, oh my God, I've messed with the wrong king. And he's like, he starts freaking out and crying and like pissing himself on the battlefield. And Vaughn is just this remorseless monster cutting through, people and stuff like that. And to me, that was a real moment of when anime was like, we can be serious too. We can be real talk. This is viscerality. This is not, your fairy tale story. This is like real talk, real story. So that's my like realism story from
Okay, all right. Oh, we take that. Uh,
yeah.
boy, man, I haven't seen more than the first two episodes of the series of Escaflowne, so I couldn't comment on that scene. But the way you described it to me sounded like Dragon Ball Z. So I, what the fuck do I know?
Well, and I mean, and to be fair, again, Dragon Ball Z does those things, but cartoonishly, like I was saying. So Dragon Ball Z will, and there's some moments early on where it's like, I think Raditz walked up and he was like, just to make sure you won't betray us, brother, and he like breaks Goku's arms
Yeah.
or something like that, and that's serious. I don't disagree that that's serious, but it's not to the level of like a horse getting ripped in half like tissue paper and its guts spilling out on the floor. You know, there's there's a bit more in terms of the attention given to the visceral shock value or the viscerality of that thing that makes it important, which is why I
Or,
think Jump tried to push Attack on Titan, which is why Attack on Titan was pushed so hard by the marketing services that are tied to Jump.
did
Um,
you enjoy Attack on Titan?
because what's that?
Did you personally think Attack on Titan was a worthwhile show? Had a lot to offer?
Well,
In
I
the
think
viscerality
that
regard, I mean, it did all. It's those bold outlines and those action lines, man.
right.
It's
No,
intense.
and that's, I mean, people, well, and let's, so in looking at the discourse that surrounds Attack on Titan, I mean, we can see that the fans, I mean, in terms of what I experienced, in terms of what I've seen, So it's all anecdotal, but people who said they were fans of Attack on Titan, what they were saying is basically like, oh, it's good, it's serious business, it's like real talk, the anime, and that kind of thing, and it's realistic, and Attack on Titan actually has really poor, you know, um, I want to say like figure work in terms of a 3D space. It doesn't actually treat its figures very well. It only does so as like a sort of side note to the gesture work. But like you were saying, the bold outlines, the attention to violence, the viscerality that's conveyed through the narrative. So much attention in Attack on Titan is paid to viscerality, to the danger inherent in swinging around on a whatever 3D maneuvering gear around this Titan's head, that you get sucked into the narrative and you feel, wow, this is real. And that's because of the viscerality of the experience, and yeah, so I think that Attack on Titan embodies that viscerality. And I think that in regards to that, I think Attack on Titan it's it's a thing, it's like an actual thing. It's not just like a play on other things. It's not like a Kama Ga Kill. It's not trying to shock you into anything. It's just literally the way that the artist chooses to convey their narrative. It's very Gantz like, in terms of, this is, I choose to portray things with body horror. I choose to engage you with viscerality. You cannot escape. And that's different than Dragon Ball Z, which was
Mm,
like
I get you.
engaging you with the thrill of the fight, but not with the viscerality of the consequences.
Mm. But hmm. So how's that different from Escaflowne?
So Escaflowne, the TV show, engages you with the fact that it's like a romantic dragon mech
Yeah,
fantasy
yeah, yeah.
world narrative, but the movie, and people will speak to, and this is why if you look at the ratings, people are like, the movie's cool, but it's like weirdly written, because the movie literally just it jettisons all of the actual like characters and politics and all that stuff in complete favor of viscerality. So like
Uh,
in the show, you're like, here's the character, here's their motivations, here's their path to villainy. And in the movie, you just get one shot of a dude like on a naked throne saying, like, yes, I will kill everybody. And you're
okay.
like, oh, okay, like I know where this is going, but it's totally different experience.
Uh,
It's very much a visceral experience. There's no real story, and everyone's kind of monstrous in the movie.
huh.
So,
Well,
but and I'm just saying that that speaks to the difference in intent and in styles. But
sure.
again, I think that's something unique to like 80s anime. I don't know if that's something that's unique to anime in general.
Yeah, certainly not the anime that I'm familiar with. Boy, that's really cool, and I kind of have nothing to say because I don't really, and that's kind of how I felt when you were trying to defend that scene in Gurren Lagann where, where Kamino looks at the skeleton and thinks about his father and all that, and where I just was like, I don't really have an opinion here or a position here that I can reliably defend because I just don't recognize this or understand this as well as you do clearly. So
Well, but that's the same thing as what you were saying. That is the
that's the database.
well, no, I mean, well, I'm sorry. Every
Okay,
time you
sorry.
say that, I can't think of that. There's a song from the theme song from Log Horizon is called Database, and they're like, we're all living in a database. It's really cheesy. So every time you say database, I just hear the Log Horizon theme song. But and I swear I'm not an anime fan. No, I'm
uh,
but the same way that you were saying that one of the characters from Madoka pointing out the fact that their narrative does not operate by the rules of magical girl shows, by saying it would be like one of those shows where love and
yeah,
feelings win out or whatever.
yeah.
The same way that it's the same way that Kamina seeing the skull of his father becomes a very important point in the narrative, because in other super robot shows, his dad would be like the big bad guy, or his dad would be like a character they encounter.
Hmm.
His dad would have consequence
Yep.
because he's a big man with big dreams that has a big influence on one of the characters' life. So obviously he's going to be a character, and the show is like, no, he's just a guy who popped up on the surface and died in the desert,
Yep.
like, because that's what happens. And you're like, oh, and the show, that's the entire point of Gurren Lagann, is that basically nothing means anything unless you work to make it mean something. Which is why, spoilers, in the movie, the ultimate form of Super Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann is Space Kamina. It's like
Yeah.
super space Kamina, because if you look at the narrative as a whole, he was just like a guy and he really didn't accomplish much, like
Yeah.
he just kind of died, and in the end he didn't really use
Whoa.
spiral power as Simone did and stuff, but he is reconstructed in the very end as like the
Yeah.
ultimate life form
He's an
by the
idea.
people whom he influenced.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty great.
And right, right. And so that's the same thing. So it's the addressing of the medium, it's the addressing of the database of the social codices or whatever. It's the yeah,
Hmm.
it's all part of that. And I love that scene. I love that scene because it was the moment when the show is like, I mean, that's the point at which you realize, yeah, people are gonna die. People, serious business. People were like, oh, episode 8, Gurren Lagann, serious business, Kamina died. And I'm like, yeah, that's a real. I agree with that. That's like a serious point. But the turning point for me was the skull. The turning point for me was Kamina, the narrative acknowledging that Kamina is
Mm.
basically aware and hugely afraid of dying, and especially dying basically unknown and afraid and a nobody. And I'm like, that is such an adult fear. That's such a real consideration, such a real fear that it just shows it shows you where the narrative is going. It shows you where their head is at. You know.
Right. And I think you've done a great job describing it, and I kind of want to wind it down now. But I think what's clear to me from talking to you a little bit more is that you really appreciate the stakes of the show, and I keep using that word, but I think it's right. Um, that anime creates stakes. It creates situations where stakes are meaningful, and it shows. It's often not afraid to show the ramifications for someone's actions, which I think is the coolest thing in the world too. And whether it's through, you know, these intense moments, or it's through uh, drama, or something as silly as, the character drama in K-On!, you can still have stakes. And I think that will be our takeaway from talking with user Seifuu on what inside the anime fan studio.
Yeah,
That
I
was
agree.
good.
I
That
agree.
was good.
Pork chops, steaks. I'm
That's
all about
push.
it. No, I definitely agree. I
Okay.
totally agree with that
Yeah,
statement. I
fuck it.
think
That's gonna be a
the
meme that nobody's gonna get.
Yeah, I agree with the reason why people want anime to be real and they don't care really if cartoons are real. The majority of people, um, is because there's a realism. There's a very definite realism. There are real stakes that are inherent to anime, and I think part of the reason why we respond so strongly to anime is because it's a place where creators are very honest about what they care about. They're very honest about the story they're trying to say, and they're saying, "Look, this is real. These are
Yep.
real stakes, and this is my
Yep.
real opinion." And people accept that honesty.
Yep. Well, great. Great. Thanks for taking the time,
Yeah,
and
fun
we're
talks.
gonna stop recording.
All
And
right,
all right,
GG.
nice.